The wind cut through the mountains like 1,000 frozen knives. Bear McKenna pulled his fur coat tighter around his broad shoulders, his breath coming out in thick clouds of white mist. He'd been checking his trap line since dawn, and the sun was already starting to sink behind the jagged peaks. The sky had turned an angry shade of gray, the kind that promised a brutal night ahead. Bear had seen 12 winters in these mountains. 12 long years of solitude, hunting, trapping, and surviving, where most men would have died in their first season. He knew every canyon, every creek, every cave that could offer shelter from a storm. The wilderness had become his home. His only companion, the occasional passing trader or the animals he hunted. He was a big man, standing well over 6 feet tall, with a thick beard that had started to show streaks of gray despite him being only 38 years old. His hands were calloused and scarred from years of working trap lines, skinning pelts, and chopping wood. His eyes, though weathered by sun and snow, still held a sharpness that missed nothing. The trap line had been good today. 3 beaver pelts, prime quality, worth good money when the traders came through in spring, but that was months away. Right now, his only concern was getting back to his cabin before the storm hit with full force. He could feel it coming, the way the air pressure changed, the way the birds had gone silent hours ago. Bear moved through the snow with practiced ease, his snowshoes leaving deep impressions in the fresh powder. The forest around him was eerily quiet. Even the wind seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for something. He'd learned long ago to trust his instincts in these mountains, and right now, those instincts were screaming that something wasn't right. He stopped suddenly, his head tilting to one side. There it was again, a sound that didn't belong to the wind or the creaking trees. It was faint, barely audible, but it was definitely human. A voice, weak and desperate, crying out somewhere in the distance. Bear's first thought was to ignore it. He'd survived this long by minding his own business, by staying away from trouble. The mountains were full of dangers, and getting involved in someone else's problem usually meant risking your own life. But the sound came again, more desperate this time, and something in his chest tightened. He cursed under his breath, his weathered face creasing into a frown. His brother's voice echoed in his memory, from years ago before the winter that took him. "We ain't animals, James, we're men, and men help each other even out here." Bear adjusted his pack and started moving toward the sound. His rifle hung ready across his chest just in case. You never knew what you'd find in these mountains. Could be a trap set by hostile natives. Could be a wounded animal making strange sounds. Could be his mind playing tricks after too many years alone. The snow was getting deeper as he moved away from the trail. His legs burned with effort as he pushed through drifts that came up to his knees. The wind was picking up now, howling through the pines like a pack of wolves. The temperature was dropping fast, and he knew he didn't have much time before the storm hit in full force. Then he saw her. At first, he thought it was just a pile of furs left beside the frozen creek. But as he got closer, he realized it was a person, curled up in the snow, barely moving. Bear's heart started pounding as he rushed forward, his snowshoes kicking up powder. It was a woman, and she was in bad shape. Her skin had taken on a bluish tint. Her lips were almost purple, and her breathing was so shallow he had to put his face close to hers to feel it. She wore deerskin clothing that was soaked through, frozen in places, offering no protection against the deadly cold. Bear knew what exposure looked like. He'd seen it kill men stronger than this woman, seen it take his own brother. She had maybe an hour left, maybe less. The cold was already shutting down her body, pulling her toward a sleep she'd never wake from. He looked around quickly, taking in the scene. There was a small bundle beside her, supplies for a journey. A water skin, frozen solid, some dried meat, a blanket that had blown away and caught on some brush a few yards off. This wasn't an accident. Nobody traveled alone in these mountains in winter, especially not a woman. Bear knelt beside her and gently turned her face toward him. She was Native American, her features delicate despite the ravages of cold and exhaustion. Her long black hair was tangled with ice crystals. On her arms he could see fresh cuts, deliberate and ritual. In her hair there was white clay, the kind used in mourning ceremonies. She was Shoshone. He recognized the beadwork on her clothing, the specific patterns her tribe used, and from the mourning marks she'd lost someone recently, a husband most likely, given the severity of the ritual scarring. The woman's eyes fluttered open for just a moment. They were dark brown, filled with pain and something else, resignation, acceptance. She whispered something in Shoshone, Words he couldn't understand, then her eyes closed again. Bear didn't hesitate anymore. He scooped her up in his arms, surprised at how light she was, like holding a bundle of frozen sticks. His cabin was 2 miles away, maybe a bit more. 2 miles through deepening snow, with a blizzard coming and a dying woman in his arms. He started walking, his legs pumping hard, his breath coming in gasps. The woman's head lolled against his shoulder, her body limp and cold. He tucked her inside his coat, trying to share what little warmth he had. It wasn't much, but it might buy her a few more minutes. The storm hit before he'd covered half the distance. The wind roared like a living thing, ripping at his clothes, throwing snow in his face so thick he could barely see 5 feet ahead. Bear lowered his head and pushed forward, relying on memory and instinct to guide him home. His arms started to ache. His legs felt like lead. The cold was seeping through his coat now, and he knew that carrying her like this, sharing his warmth, was putting his own life at risk. But he couldn't put her down. Wouldn't. Something about her, about the resignation he'd seen in her eyes, made him grip her tighter. "Stay with me," he muttered, though he knew she couldn't hear him over the wind. "Just stay with me a little longer. We're almost there." He wasn't sure if he was talking to her or himself. The cabin appeared out of the white chaos like a miracle. Bear kicked the door open and stumbled inside, laying the woman on the floor near the fireplace. His hands were shaking as he built up the fire, throwing on logs until flames roared up the chimney. The woman hadn't moved. Her breathing was even more shallow now, her skin like ice beneath his touch. Bear looked down at her. This stranger he'd risked his life to save, and wondered what had driven her out into the mountains to die. But wondering could come later. Right now he had work to do. He'd fought death before in these mountains. Tonight he'd fight it again. And this time he was determined to win. Bear had never moved so fast in his life. The fire was blazing now, but it wasn't enough. The woman on his floor was dying, her body temperature so low that he wasn't sure she could come back from it. He'd seen men die from exposure before, watched the life drain from their eyes as the cold claimed them. He wasn't about to let it happen again. His hands worked quickly, pulling off her frozen clothing with careful efficiency. There was nothing improper about it. This was survival, pure and simple. Her deerskin dress was stiff with ice, and he had to cut parts of it away with his knife. Her moccasins came off next, revealing feet that were pale and lifeless. Bear grabbed every fur and blanket he owned, piling them on top of her. But he knew that wasn't enough either. External heat alone wouldn't save her. Her core temperature was too low. He needed to warm her from the inside and outside at the same time. He'd learned this trick from an old French trapper years ago. Heat stones by the fire, wrap them in cloth and place them around the body. Not too hot or you'd burn the skin, but warm enough to slowly raise the temperature. Bear grabbed 6 smooth river stones from his supply and placed them directly in the coals. While the stones heated, he made broth. His hands shook as he crumbled dried venison into a pot of melting snow, adding some wild herbs he'd collected last summer. The woman needed liquids, needed something warm inside her to jumpstart her body's own heating system. Every few minutes, he checked on her. Her breathing was so shallow he had to put his ear to her chest to hear it. Her heartbeat was slow, irregular, like a clock winding down. He rubbed her hands and feet, trying to stimulate circulation, but there was barely any response. The stones were ready. Bear wrapped them carefully in pieces of cloth and placed them around her body, under her arms, near her stomach, by her feet. The heat radiated through the fabric, and he watched anxiously for any sign of improvement. Hours passed. The storm outside raged like an angry beast, rattling the shutters and howling down the chimney. But inside the cabin, Bear worked tirelessly. He forced small amounts of warm broth between her lips, massaging her throat to make her swallow. Most of it dribbled out, but some went down. He changed the stones when they cooled, keeping a constant rotation. He added more furs when she started shivering, which was actually a good sign. Shivering meant her body was trying to generate its own heat again. Around midnight, she started to mumble. The words came out in Shoshone, urgent and distressed. Her head moved from side to side and her hands clutched at the furs covering her. Bear leaned closer, trying to understand, but the language was beyond him. One word kept repeating, "Tahuna, Tahuna." She said it with such pain, such longing, that Bear felt something twist in his chest. Whoever Tahuna was, this woman loved him deeply. Then she started crying, tears streaming down her cheeks, even though her eyes remained closed. Her body shook with sobs, and Bear didn't know what to do. He'd fought grizzly bears, survived avalanches, crossed frozen rivers in the dead of winter, but a crying woman was something he had no experience with. Awkwardly, he placed his calloused hand on her shoulder. "It's all right," he said softly, even though he knew she couldn't understand him. "You're safe now. You're going to be okay." The crying eventually subsided and she fell into a deeper sleep. Bear sat back against the wall, exhausted. His eyes burned from lack of sleep and every muscle in his body ached. But he couldn't rest, not yet. He had to keep watching her, keep making sure she was still breathing. He thought about his brother, about that terrible winter 7 years ago. They'd been caught in a storm much like this one. His brother had fallen through ice, and by the time Bear pulled him out, the cold had already sunk its teeth in deep. They'd made it to a shelter, and Bear had done everything he could, everything he knew. But it hadn't been enough. He'd held his brother as he died, watched him slip away despite all his efforts. The guilt had eaten at him for years. Maybe that's why he'd stayed in the mountains, why he'd cut himself off from everyone. Out here, alone, he couldn't fail anyone else. But now, looking at this woman, this stranger he'd found in the snow, Bear felt that old determination rising up again. He wasn't going to lose another person to the cold. Not tonight. Not ever again if he could help it. Dawn came slowly. The storm had passed, leaving everything buried under fresh snow. The world outside was silent and white, peaceful in a way that seemed to mock the struggle that had taken place inside the cabin. Bear checked the woman's pulse, stronger. Her breathing was deeper, more regular. Her skin had regained some color, no longer that terrible blue-white shade. He allowed himself a small moment of relief. He made more broth, stronger this time, and managed to get a few spoonfuls down her throat. Her body accepted it without resistance, which was another good sign. He changed the furs, rotating the damp ones out to dry by the fire, replacing them with dry ones. Around mid-morning, her eyes opened. Not the glazed, unfocused look from before, but clear and aware. She stared up at the ceiling of the cabin, confusion written across her face. Then her eyes moved to Bear, who was sitting nearby, whittling a piece of wood to stay awake. Their eyes met. Fear flashed across her face and she tried to sit up, but her body wouldn't cooperate. She was too weak, too exhausted from her ordeal. Bear held up his hands in a peaceful gesture. "Easy now," he said gently. "You're safe. I found you in the snow. You were dying." She didn't understand his words, but maybe she understood his tone. She looked down at herself, at the furs covering her, at the strange cabin around her. Then she looked back at Bear and tears welled up in her eyes again. She spoke in Shoshone, her voice hoarse and broken. The words tumbled out, filled with emotion. Bear caught the word Tahuna again, and he understood enough to know she was telling him something important. Then she switched to broken English, the words coming slowly and with difficulty. "Why?" she whispered. "Why you saved me?" Bear set down his whittling. He thought about how to answer that. Why had he saved her? He could have kept walking. Could have told himself there was nothing he could do. Could have chosen his own safety over hers, but he hadn't. And sitting there now, looking at this woman who'd been so close to death just hours before, he knew the answer. Because it was the right thing to do, he said simply. She shook her head weakly, more tears falling. "I go to mountain to die," she said in halting English. "To join Tahuna. My husband, he gone. I have nothing, no reason to stay." The words hit Bear harder than he expected. He understood that kind of grief, that feeling of having nothing left to live for. He'd felt it himself after his brother died. "Well," he said quietly, "you ain't dying today. Not in my cabin. Not on my watch." She looked at him for a long moment, something unreadable in her dark eyes. Then she closed them again, exhausted from even that brief conversation. Bear went back to his whittling, but his mind was churning. This woman had wanted to die, had gone out into the mountains specifically to end her life, and he'd saved her, pulled her back from the edge against her will. What happened now? He couldn't just send her back out there. But he couldn't keep her here either. This was his space, his solitude. He'd come to these mountains to be alone. Outside, a raven called out, its voice echoing across the white landscape. Bear looked toward the window, then back at the sleeping woman. Everything had just gotten a lot more complicated. 2 days had passed since Bear pulled the woman from the snow. She was getting stronger, able to sit up now and take broth without his help. Her name was Ayana, she'd told him. It meant eternal blossom in her language. though she'd said it with such sadness that Bear wondered if she felt the name didn't fit her anymore. They communicated in a mixture of broken English and hand gestures. Ayana knew some English from trading posts, though her words came slowly, carefully chosen. Bear knew maybe a dozen words of Shoshone, picked up over the years from brief encounters with hunting parties. Between the two they managed. She sat wrapped in furs near the fire, her long black hair now clean and braided. Bear had given her one of his old shirts to wear, and she'd wrapped it around herself like a dress. Her eyes, though still holding deep sadness, had regained some life. Bear was cooking a stew, throwing in chunks of venison and some wild onions he'd stored. The cabin was warm, almost cozy, though the silence between them was heavy with unspoken questions. Finally, Ayana spoke. "You want to know," she said quietly. "Why I go to mountain?" Bear stirred the pot, not looking at her. "Only if you want to tell me. Ain't my business otherwise." She was quiet for a moment. "No, you saved my life. You deserve to know whose life you save." Bear settled down against the wall, his long legs stretched out. He didn't push her, just waited. He'd learned long ago that some stories couldn't be rushed. Ayana's hands twisted in the fur blanket. "Tahuna was my husband. We married 3 summers ago. He was good man, strong, kind. Make me laugh." A small smile flickered across her face, then vanished. "He was best hunter in our village. Fast as smart. Everyone respect him." She paused, staring into the fire. The flames reflected in her dark eyes. 3 weeks ago, he go hunting with other men. Big elk they track for 2 days. Tahuna, he climb rocks to get better shot. Her voice cracked slightly. Rocks break, he fall. Long fall. Bear's jaw tightened. He'd seen plenty of hunting accidents in his time. The mountains were beautiful but merciless. Other hunters, they bring him back. He's still alive, but... She touched her head. Inside, something broken. He know me for 1 day. Speak to me, hold my hand. Then he sleep and never wake up. The cabin was silent except for the crackling of the fire and the bubbling stew. "I am sorry," Bear said finally. The words felt inadequate, too small for the weight of her loss. Ayana nodded. "In my tribe, when husband die, wife cut arms." She showed him the healing cuts on her forearms. "Put white clay in hair. Mourn for 1 season. Then family help her find new life, maybe new husband. But you have family?" Her face crumbled. "No, my mother, father, 2 brothers, 1 sister. All die when I was young girl. Sickness come to village, many die. Tahuna's family, they take me in. Raise me. Then Tahuna and I marry. His parents, they were my parents too. What happened to them? They died too. 2 winters passed. First his father, then his mother. Old age." She looked down at her hands. "So when Tahuna die, I have nobody. No husband, no parents, no children." "No children?" Bear asked gently. She shook her head, and he could see the pain that question caused. "We try for 3 summers. I pray, make offerings. Medicine woman give me herbs. But no baby come. Tahuna say it not matter, say I am enough. But I know he want son. Want daughter." Bear pulled the pot off the fire and filled 2 wooden bowls with stew. He handed one to Ayana, who accepted it with a small nod of thanks. They ate in silence for a while. The stew was simple but hot and filling. Bear watched as Ayana ate slowly, her appetite still weak but improving. "So you went to the mountains," Bear said eventually. "To the sacred peaks." "Yes. In my tribe, we believe spirits of ancestors live in high mountains. When person die, their spirit go up, join the old ones. I think, if I go there, if I die there, maybe I find Tahuna again. Maybe we be together in spirit world." She said it so matter-of-factly, as if walking to your death was the most logical thing in the world. And maybe, from her perspective, it was. "What about your tribe?" Bear asked. "They didn't try to stop you?" Ayana's expression darkened. "I tell no one. I wait until night, take small supplies, walk into forest. I know they look for me, but I know mountains. I hide move at night. After 3 days I get far enough they cannot find me. They'll think you're dead. Yes, it is better. They mourn, then forget. I am no one important. Just widow with no family." Bear set down his bowl. "Now hold on. You're wrong about that." She looked at him, confusion in her eyes. "You think you're not important? You think your life don't matter just because you lost people?" Bear's voice was rough but not unkind. "I've been alone in these mountains for 12 years. Lost my brother, lost my way. Figured I was better off by myself where I couldn't hurt nobody and nobody could hurt me." He leaned forward. his weathered face serious. But you know what I learned? Being alone don't fix the hurt. It just makes it echo louder. And throwing your life away don't honor the people you lost. It just adds more death to death. Ayana's eyes glistened with tears. But the pain, it too much. Every day I wake and remember he gone. Every night I sleep in empty space where he should be. Food tastes like nothing. Sun has no warmth. How I live like this? Bear was quiet for a moment. He understood her pain more than she knew. After his brother died, he'd spent months wishing he could trade places, wishing it had been him instead. I ain't going to tell you the pain goes away, he said honestly. Can't promise that because I don't know if it does. But I know this. You survived that mountain. You survived the cold that should have killed you. That means something. What it mean? Maybe means you're stronger than you think. Maybe means you got something left to do in this world. Maybe means Tahuna wouldn't want you dying on a mountainside, throwing away the life he loved. Ayana was crying now, silent tears streaming down her face. He'd tell me last day when he still know me. He say, live well, live long. Be happy, I promise him. But I cannot keep promise. You can, Bear said firmly. Might take time. Might take a lot of time. But you can. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. You speak like you understand. I do. More than you know. They sat together in silence, two broken people who'd found each other in the wilderness. Outside the sun was setting, painting the snow in shades of orange and pink. What I do now? Ayana asked finally. I cannot go back to tribe. They think me dead. Bear scratched his bearded chin. Well, that's something we'll figure out. Storm's passed, but there's more coming. You're still weak. Need at least a few more days to get your strength back. You let me stay? Ain't gonna throw you out to die after all the work I put into keeping you alive, Bear said with a slight smile. Besides, got plenty of supplies, got room. Won't be no trouble. Ayana looked around the small cabin, seeing it properly for the first time. It was rough but well made. Furs hung on the walls, traps and tools lined one side. A small shelf held some books which surprised her. She hadn't expected a mountain man to read. You live here alone long time, she observed. 12 years. Not lonely. Bear shrugged. Lonely's better than the alternative. Out here can't disappoint nobody. Can't lose nobody. Can't fail nobody. But you saved me. You not fail. He looked at her, something shifting in his expression. No, I guess I didn't. For the first time since Tahuna's death, Ayana felt something other than crushing grief. It wasn't happiness exactly, and it wasn't hope. But it was something. A tiny crack in the darkness that had swallowed her whole. Thank you, she said softly, for not letting me die, even though I want to. Bear nodded. You're welcome. And Ayana, maybe someday you'll be glad you didn't. She didn't believe him, not yet. But she didn't argue either. Outside, the first stars were appearing in the darkening sky. Inside the cabin, the fire burned warm and steady, and for the first time in weeks, Ayana closed her eyes without wishing she wouldn't wake up. Bear woke to silence. Not the comfortable silence of a winter morning, but something else. Something wrong. He'd lived in these mountains long enough to know the difference between natural quiet and the eerie stillness that came before danger. His eyes snapped open and he lay perfectly still on his bedroll listening. The wind had stopped completely. No birds called. Even the usual creaking of the cabin's wooden beams had gone silent, as if the whole world was holding its breath. Across the room, Ayana was still sleeping, wrapped in furs near the dying embers of the fire. She'd been getting stronger each day and color had returned to her face. 3 days had passed since their conversation, and she'd started helping around the cabin, insisting she needed to earn her keep despite Bear's protests. But something was wrong this morning. Very wrong. Bear rose slowly, careful not to make noise. His rifle leaned against the wall near the door and he reached for it with practiced ease. The weight of it in his hands was reassuring, familiar. He moved to the window and peered through a gap in the wooden shutters. What he saw made his blood run cold. Warriors. Dozens of them. No, more than dozens. They surrounded his cabin in a massive semicircle, their figures dark against the white snow. They stood perfectly still, perfectly silent, like statues carved from stone. Bear's experienced eye quickly counted. 50, 70, 100. More kept appearing from the tree line, taking their positions. They were Shoshone. He could tell from their dress and weapons. War paint marked their faces in traditional patterns, and they carried bows, lances, war clubs. His heart hammered in his chest. This was a war party, a massive one. And they'd come for Ayana. He understood it now. The tribe had discovered she was still alive, maybe through scouts or trackers, and they'd come to get her back. Or worse, they thought Bear had kidnapped her, had harmed her. The Shoshone were peaceful with most trappers and traders, but they protected their own fiercely. Bear's mind raced through his options. He could try to explain through the door, but would they listen? Could they even understand him? He could make a run for it, but where would he go? Even if he made it to the trees, they'd hunt him down. And he couldn't leave Ayana. More warriors appeared. The count rose past 150, then 175. Finally, the number settled around 200. 200 Shoshone warriors in full battle dress surrounding his small cabin. At the center of the formation stood an old man. Even from a distance, Bear could see the authority radiating from him. The man was ancient, his face lined with deep wrinkles, his long hair white as the snow beneath his feet. He wore ceremonial clothing, rich with beadwork and decorated with feathers and bones, a chief without question. Beside the chief stood several other older men wearing elaborate headdresses and carrying staffs adorned with feathers, shells, and strips of fur. Medicine men, spiritual leaders. This wasn't just a war party. This was something bigger. Bear's hand tightened on his rifle. Not that it would do much good. He had maybe 20 shots before he'd need to reload, and there were 200 warriors out there. Even if he barricaded the door, they could easily smoke him out or set fire to the cabin. A soft sound behind him made Bear turn. Ayana had woken up and was sitting upright, staring at him with wide eyes. She'd seen the tension in his body, the rifle in his hands. "What wrong?" she whispered. Bear didn't know how to answer. How do you tell someone that their entire tribe has shown up at your doorstep with what looks like every warrior they have? "Ayana," he said carefully, "I need you to stay calm. Don't be afraid." Her eyes narrowed. "Why I be afraid? What happened?" Instead of answering, Bear stepped aside and gestured to the window. "See for yourself." Ayana moved to the window, and the moment she looked out, all color drained from her face. Her hand flew to her mouth and she made a small sound of shock. "No," she breathed. "No, no, no." She stumbled backward and Bear caught her arm to steady her. She was trembling, her eyes wide with fear or shock or both. "It's going to be okay," Bear said, trying to sound confident. "We'll explain everything. Tell them you're safe, that I helped you." But Ayana was shaking her head frantically. "You not understand that my grandfather, Chief Washakie, he lead Eastern Shoshone, he very powerful. Very respected. Your grandfather?" Bear's mind reeled. She'd said she had no family left. "My mother's father. I not see him since I was small girl, since my parents die. He was angry that his daughter marry outside his direct band, so when she die, he not take me in. Tahuna's family did instead." She moved back to the window, her voice dropping to barely a whisper. "If he here with war party this big?" She turned to look at Bear, terror in her eyes. "They come for war. They think you hurt me. They think you take me." Bear's jaw clenched. This was exactly what he'd feared. "Then we explain. You go out there, tell them the truth." "You not understand Shoshone way," Ayana said, her voice shaking. "I disappear. They search, find nothing, think me dead. Do mourning ceremonies. If I alive, someone must answer for the pain they feel. Someone must pay. Pay? Pay with what?" Ayana looked at him and Bear saw the answer in her eyes before she spoke. "With blood." The words hung in the air between them. Outside, the warriors remained perfectly still, waiting. The old chief stood at the center, his eyes fixed on the cabin door. Bear set his rifle down. "I ain't dying today. And neither are you. We're going to walk out there together, and we're going to tell them the truth. They will not listen. My grandfather is proud man. Stubborn. If he think you dishonor our tribe by taking me, nothing I say will change his mind." "Then what do you suggest?" Bear's voice was sharper than he intended. "I stay in here until they burn me out. Try to fight 200 warriors?" Ayana was crying now, tears streaming down her face. "This my fault. I bring this on you. You saved my life and now you die because of it." "Nobody's dying," Bear said firmly. He grabbed her shoulders gently. "Listen to me. I've survived 12 winters in these mountains. Fought bears, wolves, storms that would kill most men. I ain't going down without a fight, but I ain't going down at all if I can help it." He moved to the door and took a deep breath. "I'm going out there. You stay here until I call for you, no. Ayana grabbed his arm. They will kill you moment you step outside. Maybe, maybe not. But hiding in here won't change nothing. Before Ayana could stop him, Bear lifted the heavy wooden bar that secured the door and pushed it open. Cold air rushed in, along with the weight of 200 pairs of eyes. Bear stepped out onto the small porch, his hands visible and empty, showing he carried no weapons. The morning sun was just breaking over the peaks, casting long shadows across the snow. The warriors didn't move, didn't speak. They just watched him with eyes that revealed nothing. Bear's gaze found the old chief, and the two men stared at each other across the snowy clearing. The chief's face was like carved stone, ancient and hard. His eyes held the wisdom of many years in the coldness of winter itself. For a long moment, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The silence stretched so thin, Bear could hear his own heartbeat pounding in his ears. Then from inside the cabin, Ayana appeared at the door. She pushed past Bear and stepped out into the snow, her bare feet sinking into the cold powder. She raised her arms to show the morning cuts, still healing on her forearms. Then she began to speak in Shoshone, her voice carrying across the clearing. The words flowed fast and urgent, filled with emotion. Bear couldn't understand what she was saying, but he watched the old chief's face. For the first time, something flickered in those ancient eyes. Surprise, maybe? Or recognition. Ayana continued speaking, gesturing to Bear, to the cabin, to the mountains beyond. Some warriors shifted their stance, glancing at each other. The medicine men leaned in to whisper to the chief. Finally, Ayana fell silent. She stood there in the snow, shivering in the cold, waiting. The old chief stepped forward. His movements were slow but deliberate, each step measured. He came within 10 feet of the porch and stopped. When he spoke, his voice was deep and resonant, carrying the weight of authority. He spoke in Shoshone first, then switched to heavily accented English, his eyes fixed on Bear. You are the one called Bear? Bear nodded slowly. That's what folks call me. The chief's eyes narrowed. You saved my granddaughter from Mountain. I found her dying in the snow. Brought her here. Kept her alive. That's all? That is all? The old man's voice held something Bear couldn't quite identify. You fight death itself and win. You return to us what we thought lost forever. Bear glanced at Ayana, confused. This wasn't going the way he'd expected. The chief continued. 3 nights past, our medicine men have vision. Great Spirit, show them Ayana walks among living. Show them white man with heart of bear, save her from cold. We think vision, just wish, just hope. We mourn, except she gone. He paused, his weathered face softening slightly. But then scouts find tracks. Find signs. Follow trail to this place, and vision is true. The old chief placed his hand over his heart in a gesture Bear didn't understand. Around the clearing, every single warrior did the same. You give back my granddaughter when spirits already claim her, the chief said. This creates sacred debt that can never be repaid. Only honored. Bear felt like the ground had shifted beneath his feet. They hadn't come for war. Bear stood frozen on his porch, trying to make sense of what was happening. Warriors who moments ago looked ready for battle were now moving around his cabin with purpose, but not aggression. They carried bundles of supplies, furs, and what looked like dried food. Chief Washakie stepped closer, and Bear noticed details he'd missed before. The old man's eyes weren't hard. They were filled with emotion, barely contained beneath the surface of his weathered face. This wasn't just a chief doing his duty. This was a grandfather who thought he'd lost his granddaughter. May I enter your home? The chief asked, his English careful and formal. Bear nodded, still too shocked to form words. He stepped aside, and the chief climbed onto the porch with slow, dignified movements. Ayana dropped to her knees in the snow, her head bowed, but the chief placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. He spoke to her in Shoshone, his voice thick with emotion. Ayana began crying, and the old man helped her to her feet, pulling her into an embrace. They stood there together, grandfather and granddaughter reunited, while around them the warriors continued their work. Bear cleared his throat. Maybe we should get inside. It's cold. The 3 of them entered the small cabin. It felt cramped with the chief's presence, his authority filling the space. 2 medicine men followed them in, their staffs clicking against the wooden floor. The chief looked around the cabin, taking in the simple furnishings, the furs on the walls, the few books on the shelf. His eyes lingered on Ayana's sleeping area, the clean furs, the evidence that she'd been well cared for. He turned to Bear and spoke in English again. I am Washakie, chief of Eastern Shoshone. My people live 3 days' journey east in valley near Great River. Bear McKenna, Bear replied. Been living in these mountains 12 years? Washakie nodded slowly. 12 winters. Alone. You must be strong man to survive so long. Or stubborn, Bear said with a slight smile. My brother used to say I was too stubborn to die. Your brother is with spirits now? 7 years now. The cold took him. Understanding passed between the two men. They'd both lost people to the mountains. Both understood the weight of that loss. Washakie gestured to the medicine men and they began speaking in Shoshone. Ayanna translated, her voice still shaky from emotion. They say the vision was very powerful. All 3 medicine men saw same thing, same night. This means great spirits speak directly, show them truth. One of the medicine men, older even than the chief, stepped forward. He examined Bear with intense eyes, then reached out and touched Bear's chest right over his heart. He spoke in Shoshone, nodding. He say your spirit is good, Ayanna translated. He say you carry much pain, much loneliness, but also much strength. He say great spirit guide you to find me because our paths meant to cross. Bear wasn't sure what to say to that. He'd never been a religious man, had stopped believing in any kind of higher power after his brother died, but he wasn't about to argue with a Shoshone medicine man in his own cabin. Washakie spoke again, and this time his voice carried the formal weight of ceremony. Among my people, saving a life creates sacred bond. When you save life of tribe member, you become part of tribe. But you save more than life. You save my blood, my granddaughter, last daughter of my daughter. He paused, his eyes moving to Ayanna with deep affection. When Ayanna's mother die, I'm angry. Angry she marry outside my direct band. Angry she leave our village. So when sickness take her, I not take Ayanna in. This is my shame, my regret. Ayanna's eyes widened. She clearly hadn't known this. For many years I tell myself she is fine, she has new family. But in my heart, I know I fail my granddaughter. When we hear she married Tahuna, I am glad. He is good man from good family, but still I keep distance. Too proud. Too stubborn. The old chief's voice cracked slightly. Then Tahuna die, and Ayanna disappear. When scouts find no trace, we think she die too. I lose granddaughter twice. Once through my pride, once through death. The pain. He touched his chest. Very great. He turned back to Bear and his eyes were intense. You give me chance I not deserve. Chance to know my granddaughter, chance to fix my mistake. You give back what I throw away. Bear shifted uncomfortably. He wasn't good with emotional speeches. I just found her in the snow. Did what anyone would do? No, Washakie said firmly. Not what anyone would do. Many men would walk past. Many would think, not my problem. You risk your life in storm. You fight death for stranger. You share food, warmth, shelter with woman, not your wife, not your tribe, not your people. This is great honor. Great courage. One of the medicine men spoke rapidly in Shoshone and Washakie nodded. He looked at Bear seriously. Medicine men say there is more. They say Ayanna carry new life inside her. Child of Tahuna. This life also saved when you save her. The words hit Bear like a physical blow. He looked at Ayanna, who had gone pale. Her hand moved slowly to her stomach, her eyes wide with shock. I not know, she whispered. I think. The grief, the cold. I think I cannot have children. The eldest medicine man stepped forward and spoke gently to her in Shoshone. He placed his hand near her stomach without touching her, closed his eyes and stood silent for a moment. Then he nodded and spoke again. Ayanna's legs gave out and she sank to the floor, tears streaming down her face. But these weren't tears of sorrow. Bear could see that clearly. These were tears of shock, of joy, of hope she thought was lost forever. He say I am maybe 6, 7 weeks with child, she said through her tears. He say the baby is strong, healthy. He say, her voice broke. He say Tahuna's spirit lives on. Washakie knelt beside his granddaughter, pulling her into his arms. He spoke to her in Shoshone, his voice gentle and loving. The medicine men began a soft chant, and Bear felt like he was intruding on something deeply sacred. He stepped back, giving them space. But Washakie looked up at him. You understand what this mean? The chief asked. You save not one life, but 2. You save last child of Tahuna, last blood of good family. You save my great-grandchild. Bear's mind was reeling. When he'd pulled Ayanna from the snow, he'd just been trying to save a dying woman. He hadn't known about her grandfather, her tribe, and certainly hadn't known about a baby. I'm glad she's okay, Bear managed to say. Glad the baby is okay too. Washiki stood, his old joints creaking. He faced Bear directly, and the weight of his gaze was immense. "You save my granddaughter when spirits already claim her," he said formally. "You fight death and win. You save child who carry blood of great warrior. This create debt that cannot be repaid, only honored." He placed his hand over his heart again. "From this day you are family to Shoshone people. Our warriors are your warriors. Our enemies are your enemies. Our land is your land. Your fight is our fight. Your pain is our pain. We stand with you until stars fall from sky." Bear didn't know what to say. He'd spent 12 years avoiding people, avoiding connections, avoiding anything that could lead to loss. And now this chief was declaring him family to an entire tribe. That's very generous," Bear said awkwardly. "But I don't need—" "This not about need," Washiki interrupted. "This about honor. About sacred debt. You accept or you dishonor what you did. You dishonor my granddaughter's life. Put that way, Bear didn't have much choice. Then I accept. With gratitude." The chief smiled, the first genuine smile Bear had seen on his weathered face. He called out something in Shoshone, and immediately warriors began entering the cabin. They brought bundles of furs, bags of dried meat and pemmican, herbs and medicines, new blankets, tools, weapons. "You cannot refuse these gifts," Washiki said. "To refuse is to insult." Bear watched as his small cabin filled with supplies, more than he could use in a year. The warriors worked efficiently, stacking everything neatly, then filing back out. Outside, more warriors were working. Bear could hear the sounds of construction. He moved to the window and saw them building a new structure beside his cabin. A larger lodge built in the Shoshone style. "What are they doing?" Bear asked. Ayana, still sitting on the floor with tears drying on her cheeks, spoke up. "They build lodge for me. They know I cannot go back to tribe yet. Still too weak. Baby too new, too fragile. So they build place for me to stay near you, near safety." "You're staying?" Bear asked, surprised. She looked at him, and her eyes held something he hadn't seen before. Determination. "My grandfathers say I must stay where I am safe, where Great Spirit want me to be. Medicine men say this mountain is sacred place for me now, place where I die and live again. I must stay until baby come." Bear felt panic rising in his chest. He'd lived alone for 12 years, and now he was going to have a neighbor? A pregnant neighbor? For months? Washiki must have seen his expression because he chuckled. "You save her life. Now you must help her live it. This is way of things. But I don't know nothing about babies or pregnant women or—" "You will learn," the chief said simply. "My people will visit often. Bring supplies, check on her. Medicine women will come, teach you what you need to know. You not be alone in this." That was exactly what Bear was afraid of, not being alone anymore. The Shoshone warriors worked with incredible speed and skill. By the time the sun reached its peak, a beautiful lodge stood beside Bear's cabin. It was larger than his humble home, constructed from sturdy poles covered with carefully prepared hides and furs. Smoke flaps at the top would allow for a fire inside, and the entrance faced east toward the rising sun. Bear watched from his porch, still trying to process everything that had happened in the past few hours. His quiet, solitary life had been turned completely upside down. Warriors came and went, bringing more supplies. Women arrived too, older ones with knowing eyes and gentle hands. They carried baskets of herbs, special foods for pregnancy, and items Bear couldn't even identify. They fussed over Ayana, speaking rapidly in Shoshone, examining her with the practiced care of those who'd helped many women through many pregnancies. One of the older women approached Bear. She was small and wrinkled, her long gray hair braided with colorful beads. She spoke no English, but she grabbed his hand and squeezed it, her eyes warm with gratitude. Then she patted his cheek like he was a child and shuffled off, chuckling to herself. Washiki stood beside Bear, watching his people work. "My sister," he explained. "Her name is Naomi. She is best medicine woman in tribe. She will visit often, make sure Ayana and baby stay healthy." "Your sister," Bear said. "She must be 82 winters," Washiki said with pride. "She deliver more babies than stars in sky." Or so she claimed. "She also very bossy. Will tell you what to do, even though you not understand her words. You learn to just nod and agree." Despite everything, Bear found himself smiling. "I'll remember that." The chief turned to face him fully. "You fear this change, yes? I see it in your eyes. You live alone long time. Now suddenly you have people around you. Responsibility. Connection." Bear hesitated, then nodded. 12 years I've been by myself. Got used to it. Preferred it even. And now you part of something bigger, Washakie finished. This frighten you? Wouldn't say frighten, just uncomfortable. The old chief was quiet for a moment, watching his people work. When I was young man, I think like you. Think I need no one. Can do everything alone. I am strong, I am capable. Why need others? He turned his weathered face toward Bear. Then I become chief. Learn that strength is not in standing alone. Strength is in standing together. Alone you survive. Together you thrive. I've survived just fine on my own. Survive, yes. But thrive, be happy, feel purpose? Washakie shook his head. No, you survive like wounded animal, hiding in cave, waiting for time to pass. This is not living. This is just not dying. The words hit closer to home than Bear wanted to admit. How many days had he gone through the motions, checking traps, eating, sleeping, without really feeling anything? How many nights had he sat by his fire, alone with memories and regrets? Great Spirit bring Ayana to you for reason, Washakie continued. Not just to save her, but to save you too. From loneliness, from slow death of spirit. Before Bear could respond, a commotion near the tree line caught their attention. More Shoshone were arriving, but these were different. They were young warriors, and they carried something between them on poles. No, someone. As they got closer, Bear saw it was a warrior on a travois, a simple stretcher dragged behind horses. The man was clearly injured, his leg wrapped in bloody bandages. Washakie's expression darkened. He called out in Shoshone, and several warriors rushed to help. They carried the injured man toward the new lodge, and the medicine women immediately swarmed around him. One of the young warriors who'd brought him in approached the chief and spoke rapidly in Shoshone. His face was tight with anger and fear. Bear couldn't understand the words, but he understood the tone. Something bad had happened. Washakie's jaw clenched, and he asked sharp questions. The young warrior answered, gesturing to the northwest, his voice rising with emotion. Finally, the chief turned to Bear, his face grim. There is trouble. Blackfoot raiders 3 days northwest. They attack small hunting party. Kill 2 of our men, wound this one. They take horses, weapons, furs. Bear knew about the Blackfoot. They were fierce warriors from the north, often in conflict with the Shoshone over hunting grounds and territory. The relationship between the tribes had always been tense, sometimes erupting into violence. I'm sorry for your loss, Bear said sincerely. Washakie nodded. Is way of things. Blackfoot and Shoshone, we fight for many generations, but this attack had come during sacred time. We have ceremony for Ayana, for her return. Blackfoot know this, still they attack. This is great disrespect, he looked at Bear meaningfully. You are family now. Shoshone enemies are your enemies. This include Blackfoot. You understand? Bear understood all too well. By accepting the tribe's protection and friendship, he'd also accepted their conflicts. He was no longer neutral in these mountains. He'd taken a side. Will you go after them? Bear asked. My warriors want to. They want revenge, want to take back what was stolen. Washakie sighed heavily. But I'm old. I see many battles, much death. Know that revenge only lead to more revenge. Still cannot appear weak. Cannot let Blackfoot think they can attack without consequence. It was a difficult position, Bear realized. The chief had to balance wisdom with strength, peace with honor. Over the next few hours, the Shoshone camp buzzed with activity. The injured warrior was treated, his wounds cleaned and dressed. The medicine women worked over him with herbs and prayers. Warriors gathered in groups, their voices low and intense, clearly discussing the Blackfoot attack. Ayana emerged from her new lodge, wrapped in a beautiful fur cloak that one of the women had given her. She looked different now, Bear thought. Still sad, still carrying the weight of her loss, but there was something else too. A spark of purpose, of future. She approached Bear and Washakie. How is the wounded warrior? She asked her grandfather. He will live. Naomi say his leg will heal, but he walk with limp. Ayana's face fell. Who was killed? Washakie told her 2 names, and Bear saw the grief flash across her face. She'd known them clearly. In a tribe, everyone knew everyone. I'm sorry, grandfather, she said quietly. Is not your fault. Is way of war, way of conflict between peoples. Ayana looked at Bear, and he saw concern in her eyes. You understand what this mean? You are Shoshone family now. If Blackfoot learn of you, they may see you as enemy too. Bear shrugged. I've faced worse than raiders. Got my rifle, got my knife, got my wits. I'll be fine. You speak with confidence of man who never faced Blackfoot. Washiki said, but there was approval in his voice. Is good, man should be brave, but also should be smart. Blackfoot are dangerous. They know these mountains almost as well as you. They are skilled fighters, ruthless. I'll be careful, Bear promised. As the sun began to set, the Shoshone prepared to leave. They'd accomplished what they came for. Ayanna was safe, the debt of honor had been acknowledged, and her new home was built. The warriors gathered their weapons and supplies, forming up into organized groups. Washiki approached Bear one final time. He placed both hands on Bear's shoulders, looking him directly in the eye. You saved my granddaughter. You saved my great-grandchild. For this you have my eternal gratitude and protection of my people. His grip tightened slightly. But know this, you also have my trust. I trust you to care for Ayanna, to protect her, to help her through the difficult months ahead. I'll do my best, Bear said. I know you will.
Is why Great Spirit Leader to you. The chief smiled slightly.
You think you save her, but maybe she save you too. You both heal each other. This is how it meant to be. He released Bear and turned to Ayanna, speaking to her in Shoshone. She nodded, tears in her eyes, and embraced her grandfather tightly. They held each other for a long moment, making up for lost years, making up for time and pride that had kept them apart. Finally, Washaki stepped back. He raised his hand in farewell, and the entire group responded in kind. Then, like a well-organized army, they began moving out. Warriors first, then the women, then the pack horses carrying supplies. Naomi, the medicine woman, was among the last to leave. She approached Ayanna and spoke rapidly, pointing at her stomach, making gestures that clearly meant eat well, rest, be careful. Then she turned to Bear and poked him in the chest. Speaking sternly in Shoshone, Ayanna laughed. The first genuine laugh Bear had heard from her. She say you must take good care of me or she come back and beat you with her walking stick. Bear grinned. Tell her I'm terrified, Ayanna translated, and Naomi cackled with laughter, her wrinkled face lighting up with joy. She patted Bear's cheek again, more gently this time, then shuffled after her people, and then they were gone. The clearing that had been filled with hundreds of people just hours ago was now empty except for Bear and Ayanna. The sun had set and stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Bear and Ayanna stood together in the cold evening air, looking at the new lodge, at the supplies stacked beside it, at the tracks in the snow that marked where an entire tribe had gathered. Your life will never be the same, Ayanna said quietly. I bring much change to you. Too much change, maybe. Bear thought about that. She was right. Everything had changed. His solitary existence, his carefully maintained isolation, his simple routine, all of it was gone now. But as he looked at Ayanna, at this woman who'd come back from the edge of death, 3 weeks had passed since the Shoshone left, and Bear's life had settled into a new rhythm. It was strange at first having someone else around. He'd wake up and see smoke rising from Ayanna's lodge, hear her moving about preparing breakfast. They'd share meals sometimes, other times eating separately. She was respectful of his space, and he tried to be helpful without hovering. Ayanna's strength had returned fully, and with it came a quiet determination. She refused to sit idle, insisting on helping with chores despite Bear's protests that she should rest. She tanned hides, mended his worn clothing with expert stitches, and prepared meals that were far better than anything Bear had cooked in 12 years. The baby was growing. Ayanna's stomach had begun to show a small, firm roundness. She often placed her hand there, speaking softly in Shoshone to the child within. Bear pretended not to notice these private moments, but they touched something deep in his chest that he'd thought long dead. It was a cold morning in early spring when everything changed again. Bear was checking his trap lines about 2 miles from the cabin when he heard the sound, a single gunshot echoing across the valley, then another. Then silence. His blood went cold. Those shots had come from the direction of his cabin. Bear dropped everything and ran. His snowshoes kicked up powder as he crashed through the forest, his rifle clutched tight in his hands. His mind raced through possibilities, each worse than the last. Blackfoot raiders, hostile trappers, renegades. Anyone could have found the cabin. Ayanna was alone. Pregnant and alone. He burst into the clearing and immediately took in the scene. 3 horses were tied near Ayanna's lodge. Not Indian ponies. These were larger horses, the kind white trappers used. 3 men stood outside the lodge, and one was trying to pull Ayanna out by her arm. She was fighting back, screaming in Shoshone, clawing at the man's face. He cursed and backhanded her across the face, sending her sprawling into the snow. Bear didn't think. Didn't hesitate. Didn't call out a warning. He just raised his rifle and fired. The shot took the man in the shoulder, spinning him around and dropping him to the ground. The other two men whirled toward Bear, reaching for their weapons. "Don't," Bear growled, already reloading. His hands moved with practiced speed, tamping down powder and shot. "Next one goes between your eyes." The men froze. They were trappers, Bear could see now. Rough-looking men with hard eyes and weathered faces. The kind who lived outside the law, taking what they wanted from the wilderness and anyone weaker than themselves. The one who'd hit Ayanna groaned on the ground, clutching his bleeding shoulder. "You shot me. You crazy mountain man shot me. You're lucky I didn't kill you," Bear said coldly. He moved closer, keeping his rifle trained on the two standing men. "What are you doing here?" The taller of the two men, a scarred brute with a missing front tooth, spat in the snow. "Saw smoke, came to investigate. Found this squaw all alone. Figured she was fair game." "Fair game." Bear's voice was dangerously quiet. "She's under my protection. This is my land. Your land?" The man laughed harshly. "Ain't no white man's land out here. This is wilderness. No laws, no rules. We take what we want." Ayanna had pulled herself up, blood trickling from her split lip. She moved behind Bear, her breathing ragged. "Are you hurt?" Bear asked without taking his eyes off the men. "The baby?" "I am okay," she said, though her voice shook. "They come maybe 10 minutes ago. Say they want food, shelter. Then they see I'm alone and they—" Her voice broke. Bear's jaw clenched so hard his teeth ached. "Get on your horses and ride out of here now. Take your wounded friend and go." The scarred man's eyes narrowed. "We ain't going nowhere. There's 3 of us and 1 of you. And I see you got a nice setup here. Supplies, furs, probably good hunting grounds. We're thinking we might just stay." "That would be a mistake," Bear said. "Would it?" The man's hand edged toward the pistol at his belt. "Like I said, 3 against 1. Even if you shoot me, my boys will get you. Then we'll take everything, including the squaw." Bear's finger tightened on the trigger. He could take one down for sure. Maybe wound another. But the third would get him. And then Ayanna would be defenseless. The men seemed to sense his hesitation. They spread out slightly, preparing to rush him. Then, from the forest behind Bear came a sound that made everyone freeze. It was a war cry. High and piercing, filled with rage and promise of violence. Warriors emerged from the trees like ghosts. 20 of them, maybe more, materializing from the forest with weapons drawn. They surrounded the clearing in seconds, cutting off any escape. At their head was a young warrior Bear recognized from the gathering weeks ago. His face was painted for war and his eyes burned with fury as he took in the scene. The wounded trapper on the ground, Ayanna's bleeding lip, Bear standing between her and the intruders. The warrior spoke in rapid Shoshone to Ayanna. She answered, her voice still shaking, pointing at the men. The warrior's face went dark with rage. He barked orders and immediately Shoshone warriors seized the 3 trappers. They didn't resist. Even the wounded one was hauled to his feet, crying out in pain. The young warrior approached Bear, and for a moment Bear wasn't sure what would happen. Then the warrior placed his fist over his heart and bowed his head slightly. "I am Running Wolf," he said in accented English. "Chief Washaki sent us to watch over you and Ayanna. We camp in forest half-days right away. We hear gunshot, we come fast." Bear lowered his rifle, relief flooding through him. "You've got good timing." Running Wolf looked at the trappers with disgust. "These men attack Ayanna. Attack member of our tribe under our protection. This is very serious." The scarred trapper, held firmly by 2 warriors, tried to bluster. "We didn't know she was with Indians. We thought she was just some lone squaw. We didn't mean no harm." "You strike her," Running Wolf said coldly. "You try to take her against her will. In my people's law, this deserved death." The color drained from the trappers' faces. The wounded one started babbling. "Please, we're sorry. We made a mistake. Just let us go, we'll never come back." Running Wolf looked at Bear. "You save her from them. You protect her." "What you think we should do?" It was a test, Bear realized. The Shoshone were giving him authority here, recognizing his role as Ayanna's protector. What he decided now would matter. Bear studied the 3 men. They were scum, no question. The kind of men who preyed on the weak, who took what they wanted without conscience. In the wilderness, there was rough justice for men like this. But Bear also knew that killing them would have consequences. Other trappers might come looking for them. The situation could escalate, and he'd seen enough death in his life. "Strip them of their weapons," Bear said finally. "All of them. Guns, knives, everything. Take their horses and supplies. Then let them go on foot. The scarred man's eyes widened. On foot in this wilderness? That's a death sentence. Maybe, Bear said flatly. Or maybe you'll learn to survive without preying on others. Either way, you're getting off easy. These warriors wanted to kill you. I'm giving you a chance to walk away. I suggest you take it and never come back to this part of the mountains. Running Wolf translated for the other warriors. There was some grumbling. Clearly they wanted harsher punishment. But Running Wolf raised his hand and they obeyed. Within minutes, the trappers were disarmed and stripped of their supplies. They stood shivering in the cold, wearing only their basic clothes. The wounded one could barely stand, leaning heavily on his companions. There's a trading post about 40 miles southeast, Bear told them. If you move fast and don't stop, you might make it. If you don't, he shrugged. That's between you and the mountain. The warriors released them and the three men stumbled toward the forest. The scarred one turned back once, hatred burning in his eyes. This ain't over, mountain man. You made enemies today. Get out of my sight, Bear said quietly, before I change my mind. They disappeared into the trees, and Bear knew he'd probably never see them again. Men like that rarely survived long on foot in the wilderness, especially with one of them wounded. Running Wolf approached Ayanna and spoke gently to her in Shoshone. She answered, touching her lip and stomach. The warrior's expression softened, and he called over one of the other men who carried medicines. She say baby is okay, but she is shaken, Running Wolf told Bear. My brother will make medicine for her lip. Make sure she is well. Bear nodded gratefully. Thank you for coming so quickly. If you hadn't, we protect our family, Running Wolf said simply. You are family now. This is our honor, our duty. The warrior with medicines tended to Ayanna's cut lip, applying a paste that made her wince but then seemed to soothe the pain. Other warriors checked the area, making sure there were no other threats. Running Wolf turned to Bear. We think you should know. Chief Washakie, he worry about you and Ayanna out here, so he sent 20 warriors to camp nearby. We watch, we protect. You not see us, but we always hear. Bear wasn't sure how he felt about that. Part of him bristled at the idea of being watched, even for protection. But another part, the part that had just faced 3 armed men alone, was grateful. How often will you check on us? Bear asked. Every day someone watch from forest. Every 3 days we come close, make sure all is well. If you need help, fire 2 shots in the air. We come fast. It was strange, Bear thought, how quickly his life had changed. The seasons changed as they always did in the mountains, but this year felt different to Bear. Spring brought melting snow and the return of green to the valleys. Summer followed with warm days and cool nights. And through it all, Ayanna's belly grew steadily larger. The Shoshone visited regularly, just as Chief Washakie had promised. Naomi, the old medicine woman, came every 2 weeks, checking on Ayanna and the baby with expert hands. She'd mutter and nod, occasionally speaking sharply to Ayanna in Shoshone, which always made the younger woman laugh. Running Wolf and his warriors rotated their watch, always keeping someone near. Bear had grown used to it, even found comfort in knowing they were there. He'd exchange words with them when they came into camp, share meals, learn bits of Shoshone language while they practiced their English. He was learning what it meant to be part of a community again. It was awkward at first, like wearing new boots that needed breaking in, but gradually it began to feel natural. Ayanna bloomed as the baby grew. The deep sadness that had shadowed her eyes when Bear first found her had lifted, replaced by something softer. She still grieved Tahuna. Bear would sometimes hear her crying softly in her lodge at night, speaking to her lost husband in whispered Shoshone. But alongside the grief, there was hope now. Purpose. A future to look toward. She taught Bear things he never would have learned alone. How to prepare food the Shoshone way, mixing herbs and roots he'd walked past for years without knowing they were edible. How to read weather signs he'd missed, subtle changes in animal behavior that predicted storms. How to find peace in the quiet moments between tasks, and Bear taught her too. How to shoot his rifle, insisting she needed to protect herself if danger came when he was away. How to set snares and traps. How to read tracks in the snow and dirt, identifying animals by their prints. They became friends. Not just protector and protected, not just neighbors, but genuine friends. They'd sit by the fire in the evenings, Bear whittling while Ayanna sewed tiny clothes for the baby. They'd talk about small things. The weather. the quality of that year's pelts. The strange bird they'd seen that morning. Sometimes they'd talk about bigger things. Bear told her about his brother, about the guilt he'd carried for 7 years. Ayanna listened without judgment, then gently reminded him that the mountain took his brother, not Bear's actions or failures. Ayanna spoke about Tahuna more openly as time passed. Happy memories instead of just pain. The time he'd tried to impress her by jumping a creek and landed face first in the mud. The songs he'd sung off-key but enthusiastic. The way he'd made her feel safe and loved. He would want me to be happy, she said one evening, her hand resting on her swollen belly. Would want his child to know joy, not just grief. You're doing good, Bear told her. Real good. You're stronger than you know. As summer faded into early autumn, Ayanna's time drew near. Naomi came and stayed, setting up in the lodge and preparing everything needed for the birth. She enlisted Bear's help, pointing and gesturing until he understood what she needed: hot water, clean cloths, certain herbs prepared in specific ways. Running Wolf brought word from Chief Washaki. The entire tribe was praying for safe delivery. They'd prepared a celebration for when mother and child were strong enough to travel to the main village. The night it happened, Bear was in his cabin trying to sleep. A cry from Ayanna's lodge brought him bolt upright. He grabbed his coat and ran outside, but Naomi appeared at the entrance, blocking his way. She spoke firmly in Shoshone, making shooing gestures. Running Wolf, who'd been on watch nearby, came running. He grinned at Bear's panicked expression. She say this is women's work. You stay out, let them handle it. But what if something goes wrong? What if she needs help? Naomi deliver hundreds of babies. She know what to do? Running Wolf put a hand on Bear's shoulder. You pace. You worry. This is man's job in childbirth, so Bear paced, and worried. He wore a path in the snow outside his cabin, listening to the sounds coming from the lodge. Ayanna's cries of pain made his chest tight with helpless concern. Hours passed. The night seemed endless. More Shoshone women arrived, summoned somehow, though Bear hadn't seen anyone leave. They entered the lodge with supplies and calm efficiency. Bear caught glimpses of firelight, shadows moving, heard voices speaking in soothing tones. Running Wolf built a fire in the clearing and sat Bear down. Here, drink. He handed over a flask of something strong that burned going down. How long does this usually take? Bear asked. Running Wolf shrugged. Sometimes quick, sometimes long. Each baby different. First baby often take many hours. Bear took another drink, his hands shaking slightly. He'd faced grizzly bears without this much fear. What if something goes wrong? Naomi very skilled. If there is problem, she fix it. Trust her. The sky was just starting to lighten with false dawn when a new sound cut through the air. A baby's cry. High, strong, healthy. Bear jumped to his feet, his heart pounding. Running Wolf grinned and stood with him, clasping his shoulder. You hear that? Strong cry. Healthy baby. This is good sign. They waited, both men standing in the pre-dawn light listening to the sounds of activity in the lodge. Finally, after what felt like another eternity, Naomi emerged. Her face was tired but smiling. She spoke in Shoshone to Running Wolf, who translated. Boy, healthy, strong boy. Ayanna is tired but well. Baby came fast once labor truly started. Both are resting now. Relief flooded through Bear so powerfully his knees went weak. Can I see them? Naomi nodded and gestured him forward. Bear approached the lodge entrance, suddenly nervous. He'd never been around a newborn baby before. What if he did something wrong? Said something wrong? He ducked inside and stopped, his breath catching. Ayanna lay on a bed of furs propped up against rolled blankets. She looked exhausted, her hair damp with sweat, her face pale, but she was smiling. In her arms, wrapped in soft deerskin, was a tiny bundle. Come, she said softly, her voice hoarse. Come meet Tahuna's son. Bear moved closer, his rough boots feeling too loud on the lodge floor. He knelt beside her and looked down at the baby. He was so small, red-faced and wrinkled with a shock of dark hair. His tiny fists waved in the air and his eyes squinted against the firelight. As Bear watched, the baby yawned, showing pink gums, then settled against Ayanna's chest. He's perfect, Bear said, his voice rough with emotion. Yes, Ayanna agreed, tears streaming down her face. Happy tears this time.
He has his father's nose, see?
And his chin. Bear could see it. The baby was clearly Tahuna's son, carrying his father's features into the future. What will you name him? Ayanna was quiet for a moment, looking down at her son with infinite tenderness. In Shoshone way, baby received name after certain time when personality show. But I call him Kohana for now. It means swift, Kohana, Bear repeated. It's a good name. He come into world fast, strong, like his father. Ayana looked up at Bear, her eyes shining. I want to thank you for everything. For saving my life so he could be born. For protecting us. For being friend when I had no one. You don't need to thank me. Yes, I do. You give me reason to live when I wanted to die. You show me that life can still have meaning even after great loss. She reached out with one hand and grasped Bear's calloused fingers. You are part of this. Part of his story. He will know when he is old enough that he alive because of your courage. Bear didn't know what to say. He squeezed her hand gently, then released it. Get some rest. You've earned it. He stood to leave, but Ayana spoke again. Bear, you lonely man when you find me. You hide from world, from pain. But now you have family. Me Kohana, the tribe. You not alone anymore. Bear looked back at her. At this woman he'd pulled from the snow months ago. She'd changed his life completely. Shattered his solitude, forced him to connect with the world again, and she was right. He wasn't alone anymore. No, he agreed softly. I'm not alone anymore. He stepped out of the lodge into the breaking dawn. The sky was painted in shades of pink and gold, and the air smelled of pine and new beginnings. Running Wolf was waiting, along with several other warriors who'd gathered when they heard the baby's cry. When they saw Bear's face, they began to cheer, raising their weapons in celebration. Word spread quickly. By mid-morning, more Shoshone had arrived. By afternoon, it seemed like half the tribe was there. They brought gifts for the baby. Soft blankets, carved toys, tiny moccasins. They brought food for Ayana, special dishes to help her recover her strength. Chief Washaki arrived on the third day. He was helped from his horse by younger warriors, his age showing in his careful movements. But when he entered the lodge and saw his great-grandson for the first time, his weathered face transformed with joy. He held the baby with practiced hands, speaking to him in Shoshone, welcoming him to the tribe, blessing him with a long and prosperous life. Then he looked at Bear, who stood nearby. You saved my granddaughter, the chief said, and in doing so you saved this child. You saved future of Tahuna's bloodline, future of my family. His voice grew thick with emotion. There are no words big enough to thank you. No thanks needed, Bear said. I did what anyone would do. No, you did what good man does. What man with true heart does. Washaki handed the baby back to Ayana and turned to Bear. You came to these mountains to be alone, to hide from pain. But Great Spirit had different plan.